All right, so let's dive in a little bit. Quick introduction. Um, I'm George. I'm a lifelong practitioner of open source intelligence. Even though there are some that are, we'll say that it's not really hacking. I'm a student of human beings and a social engineer. I'm also a founder at OK to Ask for Help. It's an org with a mission to promote culture where asking for help is not only okay, but encouraged and celebrated. And that's part of why I'm really kind of thrilled to be here today. I've worked in IT, information security, customer success, hospitality, had roles as an individual contributor, as a team lead, as a people manager, and a hiring manager. So kind of a fairly diverse background. Talked last year a little bit about, reskilling and moving over from other jobs, and I have had a lot of job roles over the years. Also recently, like many of you, I've been a job seeker and I know how difficult that can be, and we'll talk a little bit about that. If you get nothing else from my talk today, I'd love for you to take the following to heart. One, you can absolutely do this. If you want it, you can have a thriving, fulfilling career in cybersecurity, and you deserve that success, and you have what it takes. I don't know every one of you individually, but the fact that you're here today kind of tells me that. The other piece is that your career is not just going to happen. Sometimes that approach works. Sometimes folks get lucky and they land in a role that's perfect for them and they thrive. They find their tribe and their people. But better results happen when you apply a degree of intentionality. So, um, so let's dive in. So we'll start with a little bit of a dad joke. How do you catch a unique rabbit? Unique up on them. In thinking about job hunting, in some cases, that's exactly what we're doing. We're looking for something unique. And sadly, many of us have left that strategy to something called luck or just being in the right place at the right time. And it is great if that works, but that doesn't always work for everybody. So, job hunting can absolutely stink right now. I want to just talk a little bit about scarcity and practicality. Finding a rabbit in the current environment, never mind the right rabbit, can be difficult. I know that pain. I've been there myself, as many of you have. I've lived that reality. And sometimes you just need to make moves to survive. You just need to get into any role. And I think, sometimes that's great, but you should enter that with a little bit of caution because the wrong role can divert your career. It can make your mental health degrade pretty significantly and have lots of impacts on the other parts of your lives. So, um, just that word of caution. It's easy to get trapped, and having that scarcity mindset can make it difficult to escape and then move on. Part of what I like about the approach I'm going to suggest to you is that it not only helps you move towards building a career that you'll enjoy, but can thrive in. It also helps you build some practical hands-on InfoSec skills that you can not only use and discuss during your interviews, but it'll help you show up when you do get an opportunity and demonstrate that you not only have put in the effort, but that you've done in an intelligence-based way. Hopefully that provides a competitive differentiator for you as well. So in thinking about thinking about uh, what makes a good role in an organization, we have to understand why we work. Human beings work for a lot of different reasons. Of course, to earn money, to buy what we need and what we want. But it might surprise you. It's not always on the top of the list, or at the very least, it's not the most important thing on that list. Work gives us an opportunity to not only achieve the things that we need to do other things, like pay for food, etc., but it also to achieve some of those things while we work. Um, while we think we can draw a line between us at work and us at home, that strategy doesn't really work and oftentimes is a fast road to a boatload of issues that make for unhappy human beings. So as we get started in thinking about job hunting, or more importantly, moving beyond job hunting towards career management, we need to make a few large mental shifts. One, that intentionality that I mentioned. We must know why we're doing and build a practice that gives us help to achieve our objectives. And two, we must have some inkling of why we are doing what we're doing. So the first thing I'm going to suggest to you, and this may be the hardest part, is we need to get an understanding of what we're actually looking for. What makes us as an individual work? I know that might seem a little warm and fuzzy to some of you, but it really is essential. And it's something I try to understand about the people on my teams and work with them to understand better about themselves. As an example, as an interview question I heard a few weeks back, do you need to have a highly structured workday where you know exactly what's going to be you're going to be working on, or do you enjoy it more when you end up wearing many hats and just have some, autonomy and some loose instructions? Do you thrive when you get to jump in and out of contentious but collaborative meetings, or when you get to focus on just one specific hard to solve task? Um, these are kind of questions that you probably want to think about before you get into those interviews. The exercise that I use to start sorting this out is to ask you to imagine what an ideal day looks like, not a work day, but just any day. From the moment you open your eyes, is it day or night? Are you in a city? Are you in the country? Do you walk downstairs for coffee, or do you stop on your way back from a run through the park? It may not seem like it, but all of those things will help you define what you need to be looking for in a career, how much you need to get paid, where you want to live, how much responsibility you have, how much work is appropriate in your work-life mix. But I understand that's a big ask, and we can't wait till we have all of that sorted out. So while we're doing that, let's dig in and find our next steps as well. So in thinking about um, why we work, what we really need to thrive, because we're human beings and often have a better sense of what we don't like than what we actually enjoy. It's a little easier looking at that list of why folks leave and the factors that make people hate their jobs so much that they decide to go looking for another job. Try to think of it like picking a restaurant or even pizza toppings with a group of friends. And I'm sure you'll hear a lot of anything but anchovies and pineapple, and not a lot of I can only eat pizza with spinach. So if we look at studies, and there have been a lot of them on the heels of the pandemic, we get a pretty good sense of what factors make for unhappy humans in the workplace. And yes, pay is up there, but interestingly, it's not the top. So consider this. Again, people do have an ability to compartmentalize, but how we spend our working hours has a tendency to impact all the other hours of our day. So taking a job that sucks to get experience may seem like a good idea. Keep this in mind. You can't cure burnout with a long weekend at the beach. It can take months to years, and the side effects and impact of toxic work environment can be really hard to measure, but easy to observe. So how do we make a better decision before we spend days, weeks, years in a place that just doesn't feed us or allow us to thrive? What factors do we need to get a clearer understanding before we sign up, spend a significant amount of time and energy here? My suggestion is to use open source intelligence to help us gather and analyze intelligence as a foundational piece of our career management practice, and to identify some of the factors that, with a little effort, we can uncover about a potential employer before we sign on the dotted line. So for some of you, if you're not familiar with OSINT or open source intelligence, there are some great classes, by the way, that SANS offers. For those of you that might not be aware, this is somewhat table stakes for middle school, high school kids these days. Some of you are probably doing this in your day-to-day. People that are seeking relationships, or HR departments around the globe, except sometimes we call it stalking. So yeah, really anyone with internet access. And a reason to go looking for information in time. Open source is defined here, is kind of a practice of looking for collection, analysis, dissemination of information. Most importantly, what we're talking about here is information that is publicly and legally accessible. While you may impress someone in the SOC by owning that SOC, hiring managers probably aren't going to generate an offer letter based on that kind of activity. So second big mind shift is thinking about hunting versus farming. This practice doesn't work well if you just dust it off when you're looking for a job. when you're fed up for a job. Job hunting sucks, but trying to fire this practice up when you're already over your current job and under some time and financial pressure is even more difficult. So we need to think about career farming, not job hunting, intentionally working towards an objective and treating our careers like they matter long term. Not focusing so much on an aspirational job title, but finding a career that feeds all the things that we reflected on earlier and found out that we need to survive. So not just a tool that we've got in a closet, but a practice that you keep sharp, that you work on day to day, and an objective that feeds those needs as we grow. So, excuse me, sorry, fighting a little bit of a cold. So how do we get started? There are multiple OSINT frameworks, and I'll share some resources later. But as I've told my teams for years, you need a tool set that works for you. And this is why this is kind of a practice. Here are some guidelines. One, as you start selecting a tool that's going to work for you, one, consider your own operational security before you start. Understand, if you look up somebody's LinkedIn profile, they may know that you looked up their LinkedIn profile. Think about the data sets that tie back to what's important to you and a role in your career, and start looking for sources. I have a list that I'm going to share you that I use, but think about the sources that are going to be important to you to mine for that. And then check your biases. Again, this is hard to do, but understand why one source may be better than another and why you're skeptical at data. Again, news sources these days can somewhat be politicized. Many sources have a bias inherent in them. It's important to understand and know what those biases are and how we interpret them. So how to kick off. Hunting what you do. Hunting what you know helps us in a few ways. And again, I suggest here hunting yourself. You can focus on process and not results. You already know the answers, or at least you think you know the answers about who you are out there in the digital world. But even more, this is an answer that you already know, and you can focus on tuning your process and sharpening your tools. Even more, there's an added benefit here. It allows you to see what an HR department and others will see when they go looking for you, and allows you to somewhat go in and tune that, kind of like thinking like an attacker. How easy is it for someone to develop and look for information about you? What's there that you'd prefer not to be out there, and that might harm you in a career? This gives you some time to mitigate that as well, and at least have a prepared answer if it comes up in a conversation with a potential employer. If you're not actively looking for a role, if you're, just kind of firing up this practice, you can still dive in and use it to start planning your next steps, not only building your practice, but sorting out where you may want to go next, finding potential employers and keeping a list. Something I do. There are a few folks that I'm like, hey, I would always love an opportunity to work with them or work for this organization. And then just a side note, I use the same process for investing in looking for companies and organizations that I think are doing really good and interesting work. So as we start firing this up, so I've broken this down into phases. It doesn't make a lot of sense to build a full-on kit, if you will, a full-on practice on something that isn't a good fit outside of using it as practice. So this passive section here is all about getting ready, being ready, having your eyes open for an opportunity that you already know is a good fit. Again, those companies, those organizations that you already have on a list that, hey, I'd like to work to. But let's talk about actively looking for a role. The searching phase, think about this as first looks, kind of like looking at a restaurant, knowing that you're vegan and they only serve meat. Chances are that's going to be a bad fit and you can move on. As you're looking at a particular organization, their objectives, their tooling, the space they work in may just not align with any of your goals, objectives, worldview, etc. Once you've gotten past that initial search phase, it shifts over to kind of opening the door, gaining a practical advantage, if you will, and also serves to reinforce that search phase. Are you seeing things that, again, don't align? Are you finding inconsistencies? It might be a caution flag, like a world-class support or offering from a vendor that doesn't have any available contact information, or an established industry leader, air quotes, that no one's ever heard anything about. Here's where, hopefully, your operational tempo may need to kick up, and where practice and being efficient, having your knife sharp, will count the most. After you've done some of this and you get to an interview phase, even if it's just sitting down with a recruiter for that first call, you'll need to have your work done and kind of ready to go um, in that kind of interview prep phase. If that all goes well, don't stop. Of course, get yourself rested, ready, mentally prepared to dive in, but keep your practice sharp. And now you have almost an insider view and walk in with your eyes open. So this is also, and you'll see I've included here job prep. If everything goes well with the interview, you get through the interview rounds and you get the job, don't stop looking at the organization. Don't stop using that intelligence to see if there are inconsistencies as you're joining the org, and things that don't fit what you're hearing as you're onboarding. So what kind of data are we looking for in each of these phases? Again, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of data to start classifying. Um, we'll dive into tools in the next step here, but in each one of the phases that I've outlined here, and these slides will be available to you. I know it's a lot of detail to kind of pull down. I've highlighted some of the data types that I find useful. Won't review all of them, but you see that there's some crossover between each one of those phases in searching, starting to dig in, looking for that application prep, preparing that cover letter, tuning your resume. I think some of the calls this morning were talking about making sure that you've got keywords included to get through the applicant tracking systems, etc., and then doing that interview prep. Personally, I keep a OneNote file on every organization that I work, and I try to capture not only the analysis that I'm putting together about that company, but the raw data as I go, and I set some time limits for myself so I don't go down a particular rabbit hole. And before I sit down and interview with an org, I'll review that analysis that I've put together. So here's the really interesting part, I think. So you've done this work, you've got a pretty good picture of what an organization looks like, what an enterprise looks like, and now you have an opportunity to dive into an interview. In a lot of cases, we're going to be sitting there and terrified about this interview. They're evaluating us. They're really kind of digging into us. I suggest that we kind of turn the tables, and make the interview work for a little bit. Don't just be prepared, be ready for like second level questions. Again, this isn't confrontational. Ideally, it should be conversational, but go in with some thoughtful, well-researched questions and ideas about what you're looking for in this organization. Use the interview to confirm the analysis that you've completed. Example, hey, what does career progression look like at XYZ Corp? And follow that up with, it looks like many people in this role advance to their next position in 18 months. Has that been your experience? Is that by design? What programs are in place to make that kind of thing happen? Also, great time to build rapport with the interviewer. Don't go as far to tell them something that's false, but while you're doing the hunting, and again, I dig into the folks that I know I'm going to interview with, look for common ground or even adjacent ground. Be careful to not come across as stalky, but professional. Something like, hey, I saw you gave a talk at DEF CON. That was actually my first year attending. Could be a great way to kind of lower the temperature or change the temperature and move you ahead in that interview process. Don't be afraid to let them know that you put effort into preparing for the interview, but again, avoid showing off that you've dug too deep. I saw on your MySpace page that we both had an eyebrow pierced back in the 90s. Might come across a little creepy, and a little too stocky. And importantly, in the interview, set the groundwork for follow-up. Hey, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, etc. So as we start looking into the data that we're seeing, As we start gathering our data and performing our analysis, creating our intelligence, what are some of the indicators or signals that we're going to look for that are going to raise flags? Uh, I've got a list here for you. You'll see how these show up. I played around with calling out examples of this, but figured that might be limiting and create some hot water. But some of the things that you want to look for that are indicators you want to pay attention to. Poor leadership, disengaged leadership, leadership that doesn't seem to know what's going on in the rest of the organization. If they're unfriendly with their competition and they're trash talking constantly, if there's a lot of focus on all the perks of the job, but not actually what you're doing, organizations that have low or not a lot of accountability for the things they do, um, no real career support that they talk about, high turnover rates or unethical practices, uh, employees that seem to be disengaged. If you look at an organization and no one's posting anything on any of the social media outlets about what their organization's doing, that's kind of a flag or an indicator. Um, no core values or misaligned core values that aren't an apparent behavior that's not consistent with the values they say. And then simple things like weekend and off hours policies. Is there time to take lunch and make sure that you're actually fed in the real world, or lack of innovation in their products, low or no community engagement, and then little or no hiring outside of the organization can be indicators. But indicators are not flags. Indicators are not finished intelligence, um, or even intelligence on its way there. So indicators alone aren't a full answer. While we're thinking about intelligence, we need to apply context and then understand what an indicator tells us related to the other indicators that we have, and then kind of develop a theory. Don't jump right to a conclusion, but look for ambiguity or data that presents contradictory stories. And when you can't find any indicators, any detail or any context, that alone might be an indicator. Absence and ambiguity is often on purpose and by design in those organizations. Kind of like finding log files that have been recently wiped out. That's on purpose. So as we look at those and develop interview questions and develop some pivots. When we do get to an interview, or hey, if you decide to talk with someone that's currently or previously worked at your target prospective employer, ask more direct or open-ended questions. Provide some potential pivot points for yourself, and don't pose an answer you're looking for in the form of questions. So, some dead ends are questions that are easy to answer yes or no without getting a lot of detail. Is there training available? Almost every organization you're going to interview with, you're going to look at, has some training available. But is that training that's going to help you in your career, in your role? Is that training that is going to be essential for you in your next steps, or does that just take care of you in the role that they're hiring for? Create the space to get an answer. One, keep in mind you deserve an answer and keep examining. If they can't answer the question, ask for a follow-up. So simple tools that I use. Again, this is I'm providing, this isn't an endorsement on any of these tools. Some of these are going to look like absolute acronym soup to some of you, but I encourage you to kind of dig in. These are tools that are going to be useful not only in your job search, your career development, but in some cases as you move on. I will say from an OPSEC perspective, sometimes it's helpful to have a corporate email address or a sock puppet account for better operational security that you can create, register a domain name, get an email address that's not a Gmail account. Also, there are some places where you want to have a business email to get demos or marketing emails or reports that they offer that'll give you some better perspective. Tools are different for everyone. Part of the approach here I'm suggesting in building that practice is finding tools that are going to work for you. I try not to pay for tools, but sometimes that can make a difference. LinkedIn, especially while you're job hunting and looking at people that are looking at you. Um, has a paid version that's awful useful, and it can give you some metrics and some understanding. Depending on what you're doing and where you're at in your career, that investment may be worth it. And I think many of you probably have a .edu address, and many of these will have a discount, or your employer may even offer to foot the bill. So to sum up, to do some self-reflection, think about what feeds you. Think about what you're really looking for in a job besides just getting a job. I know sometimes, that's what it takes to break in, but do a little looking. Try to avoid that dive into someplace bad. Even if you do nothing else, and you thought that I'm way off base in this approach, I swear that one thing, that self-reflection, knowing what feeds you and what it's going to take for you to be successful and enjoy the work that you're doing and thrive, is going to make a huge difference. Don't wait to get started. You don't need a certification in OSINT to get moving on this. Look at some of those tools. Watch for Shodan's annual $1 subscription sale. Sign up just to kick the tires. Get in and start looking for stuff. Start with a list of orgs that you know already that you'd like to work for. Current times, like I said, we know that they're not phenomenal. Some folks have said it's the hardest time to kind of get a gig in cybersecurity, but there are roles out there. Keep trying. Build your network. There are lots of orgs just getting off the ground that are looking for folks. Don't be afraid to call them and say, hey, I like what you do. How can I come and join and help with what you're working on? Work on that network. I'm going to give you an easy way in a minute here. But again, go ahead and ask people to connect professionally. One of the things I love about information security, it's a huge community of people that are just out there and want you to succeed and want you to join us because, as Rich was saying, we have a really critical mission. There is evil in the world, and we need to push back against it. So please, start your practice. Understand it's okay if it's not perfect. Keep at it. It's a practice. Fail fast. Wash, rinse, repeat, and it will pay dividends for you in the end. At the very least, it'll keep you off the streets. And a quick note, no bunnies were harmed in the creation of this presentation. There are links for you, some different tools. And I think we can if we have a minute, I think we can take questions.